Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk about a problem that I see in the way that many parents manage the studies of their children. Often, when we think about schoolwork, we think about schoolwork being done in a seat, in a sedentary position. Um, we think of it as brain work. And when we think of education as brain work, we err, we make a mistake. And this is part of the reason why many children have difficulty making progress in their studies. It's because their, their study environment, the arrangement of their studies is such that it makes education just sedentary brain work, as if learning is something that's done by the mind. And it's simply not how learning works. Learning and study are physical activities. They're physical activities. And for studies to be done rightly and to be productively, they have to be pursued physically. If we think of all of the different activities that belong to the work of studying, they all have um, a physical manifestation or a physical means of being carried out. For example, when someone reads a book, the person can sit silent and just read the book with his eyes, reading with his mind, as it were. Well, that's one way to read a book, but you'll find that reading like that is actually very difficult. That idea of brain work adds obstacles and difficulties to the actual studies that don't need to be present. It's much better to always read out loud, to read anything we read, to read with our mouths and with our voices, so that we actually turn reading into a physical work that can be done, an objective, measurable activity. Reading should be physical. Now, if you can't read out loud because there are other people around, then what I recommend for students is just putting your fingers in your ears so that you can hear yourself and read with your voice, but quietly, and you'll be able to hear yourself. But still, we make reading a physical activity. It's physical activity. The same thing is true of any studies. Memory work can be done by reciting things out loud or writing things again and again and again. These studies can be made physical activities. And when we make studies physical activities, we have an objective, measurable activity to complete and to keep record of. So if I say if I'd like to study Latin reading for the next hour, what I should think of is what physical activity I will do for the next hour, and it should be work. It shouldn't be idle. It shouldn't be relaxed. It should be work. In Benedictine history, Saint Benedict's motto was pray and work, ora et labora. Well, there were some who thought that labora should be exclusively used to refer to manual labor, like gardening and physical work that needs to be done. And so ora et labora was understood to mean pray and do physical labor. That's how it was understood. But it was taught and explained within the Benedictine community that study is an acceptable form of labor if it's pursued with the same vigor that regular physical labor is performed. And so what we'll find is that often students are not working at studies as they would if they were raking leaves or cutting grass or shoveling snow or doing some other physical labor. We don't pursue studies as a physical work. We don't look at the hour that we have to work as an hour to physically work in a certain subject area. And for studies to be effective and sustainable, we have to convert them to physical activities. We can't do this quiet brain work that everyone seems to think is how education works. It's physical. You should read out loud. You should write and copy. You should recite out loud, and so on. So I want to encourage parents to not allow studies to degenerate into so-called brain work. The body is not simply a container or a carriage that carries the brain around. The activity of the school day should not be a student sitting idle with his body at rest, silent and still, trying to study in his mind. That's just not how it works. Our bodies are a part of the learning process. It's part of what we are. We're rational beings, but we're body and soul. And when we get our body involved in the activity of study, it helps us to focus. It gives us specific tasks to carry out. It makes study activity objective and measurable. And that's really how it has to be for us to make sustained progress. I tell students all the time, if you have to read, physically put your finger on the page and move your finger across the page line by line and read the passage out loud. So if you're assigned to read a chapter of a book, that's a physical activity. You have to physically read that chapter. And you can visualize it and make it an active study by simply putting your finger on the page and moving your finger from word to word across the lines, down the page, from page to page. Reading is a physical activity. You can read out loud and so on. Make your studies a physical activity. I tell students all the time, if you're studying Latin reading or Greek reading, the way to learn the lessons is not to sit there and memorize lists of vocabulary. It's to do physical translation exercises, to copy out the Latin and write the English translation. Copy out the Latin, write the English translation. It's physical work that helps us to learn. And when we get our different senses involved, when we get our body involved, we actually help ourselves to learn better because it concentrates our energy, it concentrates our attention on what we're studying. When we sit still and simply try to do brain work, our minds wander all over the place. It's very difficult for us to stay focused. You know this if you try to pray. It's very difficult to pray in a contemplative way because our minds are very easily distracted. When we vocalize our prayers as we're supposed to pray every day with vocal prayers, it's because it helps us to pray with attention. It helps us to stay focused and keep our attention on our prayers. Vocalizing our prayers helps us to do that. Following the readings, when we've got, let's say in the Liturgy of the Hours, looking at the page, moving our fingers across the page, reciting the prayers out loud, looking at the book, not closing our eyes, not staring off into space, but engaging all of our senses and making these activities, even prayer, making it a physical activity helps us to focus and get more work done because we can work longer by getting our whole body involved than we can by trying to do this idle brain work, which is very difficult to do. And so I want to encourage parents, if you're homeschooling your children, don't allow studies to become brain work. Another reason why it's a bad idea is because if you tell your children, okay, go study English grammar, and the child sits silent in a desk, you have no idea what the child's actually thinking about. Whereas if the child is reading out loud and reciting and writing, you have measurable evidence that the student is working on the lesson. And that's why studies have to be physical and active. They cannot be idle, sedentary brain work. It just doesn't get done. So find ways and make sure that you're using ways to study with your children that engage the senses, that engage the body, that are active, that are physical, and so on. And I'm not saying to do anything goofy. I'm not saying march around the house or dance or do skits. None of this goofy stuff. That's just a waste of time. I'm talking about reading out loud, using your finger to move across a page and read, writing things for the sake of memorization, reciting out loud, and so on. Use your body, use the senses to study, and don't allow it to be idle brain work because our minds are too easily distracted. You won't get anything done, and you'll have no idea if your children are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Make study active. And that goes for adult students too. If you want to study, you need to study with your body. You need to study actively. Use your eyes, use your mouth, use your hands. Study actively as a physical work, because that's what real study takes. It's not idle brain work. It's physical work. I hope that's helpful. God bless.